During dinner at home, my husband suddenly fell to the floor in a crumpled heap. Honey? Honey? Oh my God, what's going on? I have to call an ambulance. In a panic, I hurriedly appealed to my daughter, who was eating with us, to call for help, but... Mom, we don't have to call an ambulance, was what she said as she looked at her fallen father with the coldest gaze I've ever seen her do. Then, my daughter went on to tell me the most traumatizing truth a wife and mother can hear. This is the story of the real reasons why my husband had suddenly switched personalities for the worse, and how my daughter potentially saved my life by very professionally gathering evidence and acting quickly. I hope this will be a lesson anyone can learn, that no one can trust anybody completely. There will always be a chance that the person whom you love and trust with all your heart and soul can stab you in the back in the most unspeakable ways imaginable. Trust can be fabricated, and people must be aware of this so that they can protect themselves and take proper action to fix the problem before it's too late. My name is Felicity, and I am a 35-year-old housewife who works part-time as a waitress in a fancy hotel restaurant. My husband, Peter, is 38 years old and works in an office of a major consumer electronics manufacturing conglomerate. We used to live together with our daughter, Janine, who is in her first year of middle school. I met my husband at my old full-time job for the aforementioned electronics conglomerate, and we got married 15 years ago. Peter was well-respected among his peers and well-acknowledged by his superiors, as well as by the president of the branch himself. He was very kind and very fair, but he was also innovative and decisive. He weighed the options very professionally, made decisions, and got colleagues motivated into making it a realization. These instances of leadership sometimes made him a kind of consultant when it came to sales with respect to product quality and function. While his main job was in the sales department, for example, he offered little tweaks to the design so that it would be more consumer-friendly and affordable while yielding the expected results of the product in question. He did say that both his parents were engineers, and they taught him well on how to improve the design of something while keeping the cost of manufacture and consummation low. All in all, I respected him as my senior, which makes me think that I have a very happy family and a very nice life, because he asked me to marry him after 15 months of dating. And we were blessed with our beautiful daughter Janine, and nothing could be more perfect, I thought. But more recently, Peter had been spending his time at home with a disgruntled look on his face, probably due to his extremely busy work schedule. About 6 months ago, instances when he'd thrown away my food because he said it tasted bad became more frequent, and he even started to criticize the way I clean the house and do the laundry. In worst-case scenarios, the criticism was replaced by straight-out yelling and made living at home peacefully a bit of a challenge. I had been doing things the same way for more than 10 years, and I felt that it was too late to change my methods to suit his liking now. But I also understood that Peter was under a lot of stress because of his recent promotion, and that I was the only one who could help him relieve some of that mental stress, even though he had worked tirelessly to improve the company's performance. I've been trying to keep him satisfied, hoping that maybe someday he'll go back to being the kind, fair man I fell in love with again.
Hey, you left some spots unpolished on my shoes again.
I'm sorry. I thought I polished them properly.
You thought you did? Woman, what's the point if the thought isn't reflected in the actual results?
Yes, honey. I'll be more careful. When he yelled at me, it often ended with him telling me to stay out of his room because he was bringing his work home. He would then go into his room and not come back out until the next morning, even skipping dinner with his wife and daughter. More recently, even though he sometimes came home early, he'd been locking himself in his room like that far more often than before. I wish I could have been more patient with him, but it was definitely harder than I thought to live in the same house with him yelling at me every time we saw each other. The fact that the regular conversation was rather non-existent was what made things so much more stressful for me. If the yelling was only occasional and we saw each other and talked nicely to each other, it would have been much better. I even told my husband to at least stop yelling at me since we had a daughter who was becoming of impressionable age. But his attitude did not change, and the atmosphere in the home continued to worsen over time. In the midst of these times, I began to think that I could not go on like this for the sake of my daughter, and began to think about divorce. Then, one day, perhaps as a result of the mental stress I was under, I began to get dizzy at my job. I went to the hospital, but they could not determine the cause. When I told my husband about it, he only hit me with the, "I see," and didn't seem to care about me at all. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm sorry I made you worry, sweetheart." "Oh, you don't have to apologize, Mom. You let me know if there's anything I can do to help, okay?" "Thank you, honey." With Peter's lack of cooperation, I tried not to burden my daughter, who was still only 12 years old, with my apparent brain fog and tired body, but I couldn't go on like this forever. When I came home from the hospital one day, I called out to Peter, who was working in his room. As I knocked on his door, he let me inside. "I'm going to take a more thorough examination at the hospital next time I go, honey."
A more thorough examination?
"I don't want the cause of my illness to remain unknown."
Is it that bad?
Unlike the previous days, he showed some interest in what I had to say about my situation, but that interest soon disappeared as I gave him more details. He approved of what I wanted to do to fix the problem, essentially shooed me out of his room, and went back to work. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, Peter came out of his room, which was unusual for him after so long. "If you're not feeling well, the least I can do is bring everything to the table. You sit and let me do everything for you." "I'll help you, Dad."
Oh, looks like you have two willing helpers. Now, okay, Janie, you bring the corn soup to the table while I bring over the chicken.
I wondered if he was genuinely trying to be a better husband and father now, with all the help he offered Janine and I. I watched the dishes being laid out on the table as I thought about that.
Well then, let's eat.
Just as Peter sat down in his chair, Janine accidentally dropped a bowl of hot soup, splashing it onto her father's leg.
Ah! Hot! 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 Hot!
"Oh my God, let it cool down quickly." I hurriedly took him to the bathroom and poured cold water in his pants. After about 15 minutes of cooling him down, I checked on him and found that the skin on his leg had only reddened a little, and fortunately did not suffer any serious burns. He went to his room to change clothes and came back to the dining room. "I'm sorry, Dad. The bowl was pretty hot."
It's alright. You didn't do it on purpose. Be more careful next time, okay?
We started to eat, thankful that he didn't yell at her. Perhaps he was concerned about me, what with not feeling well and all, but he kept on staring at me as I slurped a spoonful of soup. "What's the matter? Don't stare at me like that. It's hard for me to eat." I was saying to him, when suddenly, he collapsed to the floor in a crumpled heap. "Honey?" I ran to him and examined him. He seemed to be breathing, but he was not responding to my calls in any way. I checked to see if there was any food left in his mouth, and as I turned his body on its side, I shouted, "Honey? Oh my God, what's going on? I have to call an ambulance." In a panic, I hurriedly appealed to my daughter, who was eating with us, to call for help. But, "Mom, we don't have to call an ambulance," was what she said as she looked at her fallen father with the coldest gaze I'd ever seen her do. "What? What are you talking about?" In response to my question, she began to speak quietly. "This afternoon, when you were at the hospital, I heard Dad talking on the phone with someone. I went home early because I only had a private class today. Dad said he was working from home today, right? That's why I didn't want to disturb him, so I went inside quietly." And Peter must have thought she'd gone the whole day, so he had put the other party on speaker so he could hear her clearly. As Janine quietly walked by Peter's room to go to her own, she immediately knew that the caller was a woman who had an unusual relationship with him. Janine took out her phone from her pocket, activated the voice recorder, and listened intently at the conversation. From the phone, we heard the voices of Peter and of a woman whom I couldn't recognize. "Is your wife at the hospital again today?"
Well, she looked very weak and wobbly, so I would assume she is.
"So, you and your wife are getting a divorce? Finally?"
Yeah, maybe it's time to broach the subject.
It's kind of funny how neither of us expected it to go so well, isn't it?
Well, you're the one who told me that if she suddenly got sick, it would be her fault and we could get a divorce by mutual consent.
I mean, like, duh. Nursing a sick person is hard work. And considering how busy you are every day, even your wife would have to agree to divorce you for your sake. But what did you do to make her sick out of the blue?
It was a little bit of a hassle, but I managed to convince a doctor I had some sleeping problems and needed some medicine to help me with sleeping well every night. Of course, the medicine was never for me. I was instead mixing it in with her food before she ate it, just like I planned. She got pretty sick quickly, and I'm planning to mix more medicine than usual in her food tonight.
Damn, scary. But this means you can marry me now, I hope.
Yeah, I really do think so. If I tell her I can't take care of her because I'm too busy with work, she'll agree to a divorce because she's that kind of a person. There's nothing more she hates than being a burden to someone else. If I tell her she's being one to me and to Janie, she would not only agree to the divorce, but she would agree to getting me custody over my daughter.
That same daughter had recorded the whole exchange in her phone and was playing it for me. I was shocked and speechless. I slumped on the floor, my shoulders feeling extremely heavy, my heart in my chest beating very rapidly, and drops of cold sweat beating on my forehead. Janine patted me gently on the back. I knew he was up to no good when he offered to help out with getting everything on the table, and that's why I switched your plates. It's his own fault that this happened, so I think we should just leave him be. She took another look at her father, deadly cold. I considered heeding her words and leaving him be, but in the event he died, Janine might be charged with a crime. Maternal instincts told me that this would never be a good thing to happen to her, so I called an ambulance anyway. Peter was taken to the hospital, had his stomach pumped, and woke up the next morning. You awake, Peter? When I asked him, he looked at me and Janine as though he didn't know what had happened to him. Can you talk? Do you understand what I'm saying? He nodded his head and groaned as he held his head. You took a large dose of sleeping powder last night while you were eating, and you passed out. Doctors rinsed your stomach once you got to the hospital, but it seems the effects of the drugs are still there, so they advised me to tell you to take it easy. His face was pale, and his eyes were somewhat wild with what appeared to be apprehension. It was as though he was preparing himself for an oncoming threat, and he was totally right. And there's something strange about those sleeping pills, the ones you were prescribed by a doctor about half a month ago. We found a rather large bag of pills and a lot of empty plastic film cases in your room.
That's...
My husband clammed up, but I kept talking. I also read your correspondence with your sweet girlfriend, Skylar, on the tablet where the messages are linked to.
What? That's a violation of...
Keep in mind that I did not gain unauthorized access and therefore did not violate your privacy because the tablet in question was one you sometimes use yourself. I then decided to tell my husband the information I had gathered from his chat history with Skylar Ferreira. It seems that Peter and Skylar met at a business entertainment party and had been together for about a year. He had begun to think about marrying her, but my daughter and I were in the way of making that new dream of his a reality. He wanted to get rid of us somehow. And he came upon the conclusion that he wanted to make me sick and asked for a divorce by complaining about my performance at home and yelling at me. I guess he thought that if I initiated the divorce, he wouldn't have to pay any alimony for the affair. So, you've created a situation where our marriage was on the rocks, right? But no matter how long it took, I never asked you for a divorce. You became impatient with that, and then Skylar went on to suggest that for the next time, you ought to ask for a divorce on the grounds of your spouse's illness.
Well, that's...
I wonder if you did your research on your own, though, because you seem to have been told that if I got sick, I would be the party responsible for ruining the marriage by inflicting a burden too big to bear upon the other. And by that logic, I admit it's very possible we could get a divorce by mutual consent. But what Skylar never told you, or what she never knew in the first place, or what you never took the time to research and understand everything there was to this plan, was that first of all, the conditions for a divorce to be granted for a spouse's illness is that it must be a serious mental illness that is not expected to be cured. Good examples of these include schizophrenia and Alzheimer's disease, both of which have no cure once symptoms appear. And that's not all. There are other conditions as well. First, you must have treated or cared for the patient for a long enough period of time. And second, you must have been devoted to caring for the ill party. You didn't meet either of those conditions, so what, pray tell, were you trying to accomplish with at all?
Skylar didn't tell me any of that. So I thought that maybe...
You thought that maybe? That's pathetic. A little research on the internet will give you all the information you need, you know. Peter's shoulders were trembling at my words. I admit, I've been a little under the weather lately, but that's not going to get you a divorce in your favor. It's not going to be possible to get a divorce where you walk away innocent. It's also important that the person filing for divorce is acting in good faith, and that is responsible enough to file for divorce after lots of consideration. Do you think there is any sincerity in a person who is having an affair and wants to end 15 years of work, of raising our daughter, and of building a happy family together because you got a spur-of-the-moment desire to marry another woman? I don't think so.
Hey, don't talk like that in front of our Janie.
He said to me as he looked at our daughter. Isn't it you, Dad, who was making Mom talk like that in front of me? Her father went silent at her well-formulated words. I'm sorry, Janine, but I'm going to keep talking about this because it has to be done. And last but not least, Peter, you decided to mix sleeping powder in my food to make me a guilty spouse. Last night, I said I was going to get a full examination, so you were going to give me more of the sedative and ask for a divorce while I was intoxicated. You were going to claim you couldn't take care of me because we're already a cold marriage and you're too busy with work.
And what freaking proof do you have that I was drugging you?
I have more than enough proof right here, Peter. It shows us all too clearly you were trying to get me to take the powder. My daughter took out her phone and made her father listen to his interaction with the woman when she was eavesdropping. In a panic, he outstretched his still immobile arm to take the phone from his daughter, but he collapsed to the floor in the process. I'm sorry to have to tell you this after all this has happened, but I think it was probably the best option that you would have asked for a divorce just normally. I would have agreed to it anyway. Your recent behavior has been really appalling, and I knew it was not in the best interest of Janine. I may have received enough money when we split the savings between us because I didn't know you were cheating on me, but you really didn't have to do it this way. I didn't want to live with someone who doesn't take care of his family anyway, and I don't want my daughter to see her parents arguing over an affair or money. At my words, Peter screamed as he struggled to get back into his bed.
Even if I did get rid of you, it wouldn't have mattered if Janie didn't stay with me.
What the hell do you mean?
Skylar says she doesn't want to have children. By that logic, Janie would be the only child with the potential to carry on my family bloodline. That's why I wanted to take custody over her.
What the frick? You're disgusting! My daughter looked at her father as though she was looking at a gigantic cockroach. Did he really think that my daughter, who was at an age when she was at the very least somewhat sensitive to this kind of talk from her parents, would accept a woman with whom her father was intent on replacing as her mother? By that point, the husband I had respected was nowhere to be found. He was a man who just listened to other people's stories and couldn't even think for himself. In the meantime, I'm divorcing you, and I'll take custody of Janine.
There's no way a part-time employee like you can take in a child. You do realize how expensive her gosh damn school books are, right?
Don't you get it yet? You had me drugged several times, remember? With the amount of drugs I would have taken last night, had Janine not stepped in and changed everything in one fell swoop, I could have lost my life because I'm physically smaller and less tolerant of unwelcome substances than you are. How could someone who would do such a thing get custody of a child, for crying out loud? In any case, I've already filed a police report, and I've submitted that recording Janine showed you as evidence. The divorce documents I have right here, but I'm going to leave my lawyer to deal with you on all that stupid bullshit. You should be happy, Peter. You and Skylar can finally get married. With the love you have for each other, strong enough to have destroyed a family and almost left someone probably deceased, I'm sure you'll be happy together for as long as you shall live. But first, you'll have to spend some time behind bars, I guess. I took my daughter by the hand and left the hospital. After Peter was discharged from the hospital, the police took him into custody. He was subsequently fired from his high-paying job, and his parents, who lived far away, completely broke their ties with him. I filed a demand for 40 grand of alimony for my husband's infidelity and an additional 40 grand from Skylar, who had consented to being in a relationship with a married man. I heard that she was also fired from her job and had tried to run away home to her parents, but her parents had also disowned her once police clued them in on what exactly was going on. Peter was found guilty before a judge and a jury of attempts to intentionally inflict injury to me and sentenced to 15 years in prison. I mentioned I filed a demand against him for alimony, but my lawyer told me I could demand more in damages. It's pathetic to know that if he hadn't done all this, he wouldn't be in debt, and he would be living with a woman who loved him right now, without having to wait more than a decade to leave prison. As for my daughter switching our food, 2 things were taken into consideration. 1, that she is a minor and couldn't have been fully aware of the consequences of her actions. And 2, that her actions could be acknowledged as self-defense, for she herself could have consumed contaminated food unknowingly. She was ultimately pardoned, and the fact that she seemed to be regretful of inflicting harm to another helped judges see her true intentions. She was merely trying her best to protect herself and her mother from a legitimate threat that could have ultimately had devastating consequences. With everything finally over and done with, I am currently living with my daughter in my parents' home. When I was feeling better, my ex-in-laws came to visit me at my parents' house to apologize on their now disowned son's behalf. I feel that this was especially unfortunate because I had a good relationship with my in-laws. I did happily let him be a part of Janine's life because, with everything that had happened, she was more hurt than anyone else. She had lost her father, the same person she loved so dearly all her life, and such an experience left her traumatized and solemn. She needs all the help she can get, and with all her grandparents' help, she's recovering quickly. Janine is a strong-willed girl and would never dare show such a dark, serious attitude to anyone, but she has limits too. That's why my main goal for now is to take care of her emotional needs so that this incident won't leave a tangible mark on her in the long run, and to use the money I receive to help her in however way to make that happen. Wish us luck.